notice anything about the footage. Because when I watch that footage, I think to myself, this does look, again, comical. This doesn't look like a real bombing at all. This kind of looks like a pyrotechnics display. It almost looks like a fireworks display that's being presented to us. And we're just supposed to accept that this is a real war and a real bombing. Now, if people still believe that Saddam Hussein was truly an enemy of the United States, I can completely understand why they would think that this was a real bombing. Oh, the Americans went into Iraq and they were bombing Saddam Hussein because they wanted to take him out. I can understand why people would believe that narrative. I used to believe that narrative. But as you progress through thinking about some of these topics and the process that I call deprogramming, you start to question, well, hold on, the people who run the show, do they really have enemies? Was Saddam Hussein really against the American establishment? Or was he a puppet dictator who was put there? Because if he was a puppet dictator, then why would the US have any reason to bomb him to try and take him out? Wouldn't he be in on the whole thing? And then people try to tell me, oh no, Iraq really was against the Americans. They were really at war with each other. Iraq was a separatist state and they wanted to start selling their oil in a different currency. They wanted to fight the petrodollar. And again, I used to believe all of that until I tried to look for actual evidence that this was the case. And I couldn't find any. And a country like Iraq, if you just look at it on a map, it's a fictional country from the outset. It was created after World War II. That's why they have these straight lines as their borders. It was created after the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire was broken up, we're told, by the establishment. So how could the establishment create countries like Iraq and then lose control of them? It doesn't make sense to me. So if this is the first time that someone's heard someone suggest these kinds of things, I completely understand, Greg, why they sound too out there. It must sound to people like I'm almost making this up for the sake of being like a shock jock or something, but all I'm trying to encourage people to do is to think about, why do we believe what we're told? Take, for instance, World War I. Here in Australia, we, as children, we're encouraged once a year to buy these little red poppies and to wear them and have this minute of silence on Remembrance Day for all of these people who've died. So as little children who are, children are very empathic and it's easy for their emotions to be manipulated. Well, these little children who've done nothing wrong to anyone, in a ritual once per year, they're encouraged to wear these little red poppies and for a minute to stand in silence and to remember all of these dead people they've never met. Now, if you go to school for, say, 12 years, then that means that on at least 12 occasions, you've had to stand there in silence with all of the people around you. You have to be solemn, and you have to remember the deaths of people you've never met.
We're remembering the death of people we've never met.
Maybe that kind of conditioning on us during school has a far more profound effect than we realize. And maybe that's why when someone comes along and says, yeah, but what's the evidence that millions of people died? We have a natural aversion to what they're saying because we've had all of these conditioning, all of this emotional manipulation while we're growing up. We're so convinced there must have been these millions of people dead because we've already mourned for them. But in terms of actual evidence, no, we were never given any other than second and third hand accounts from the very authorities and establishment that at other times we say we question them. But on these kinds of topics, we won't even open our minds to the possibility that maybe we have been deceived.
Well, I think you make some good points, man, and I chose 4 out of that category just because I felt like I knew more about what you were saying.
Bellaco, 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 bellaco. Boom, boom, boom.
And I don't want to be too argumentative, that's not my style. I think genuinely respect
Boom, boom, boom. Do 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 do.
realize there's a lot of people using your same type of logic
frustrated by conspiracy culture because lately people have been saying that the Earth is flat or that Australia is a hoax. And I hadn't actually heard the Australia hoax one. That one's interesting. Obviously, I live here in Australia, so maybe I'm involved in some grand conspiracy to deceive the world about Australia, but I think it's a real place. I'm here right now. So I don't believe in the Australia hoax. And as for Flat Earth, I can understand people's frustration with that as well, because I have released 50 videos. Okay, in the space of a couple of years, I released no less than 50 different YouTube videos debunking and critiquing the Flat Earth so-called theory. And it's not really a theory, it's more of a conjecture or a fantasy that a lot of these people have, that the Earth is flat. And unfortunately for me, a lot of people assumed that I was a flat earther because I used to host a show called the Ball Earth Skeptic Roundtable. And this was back in 2015, back when Flat Earth was just starting to become a thing on YouTube. So I interviewed some of the biggest names in Flat Earth. I interviewed Mark Sargent, I interviewed Eric Dubay, Jeranism, Wakey Wakey, a lot of the big names then, and some of them are still big names today. I interviewed them. And what happened was that because I would describe myself as a Ball Earth skeptic, and that was the name of the show, and I was interviewing all of these leading flat earthers, a lot of people assumed that I too was a flat earther. However, what I was doing was asking some of these guys questions about basic problems that I see with the flat earth belief system, such as there are two pole stars. Okay, there's a pole star in the north and there is a pole star here in the south. How can the flat earth belief system account for that? Or southern flights. You can fly from South Africa to Australia in the space of about 9 hours. And I know that because I did that back in 2010 on the way home from the Soccer World Cup. So I would bring these problems up with these leading flat earthers, and they would either try to avoid answering the question, or they would outright deny what I was presenting as my evidence. So in the case of the southern flights, one of our guests, live on the air, we used to broadcast live, I brought up this problem of the southern hemisphere flights, and he said to me that I can't have taken that flight because it doesn't exist. And I said, well, with the greatest of respect, I think the flight does exist because I've taken the flight. And he said, well, you must be mistaken. So then I went and got my itinerary, which I had saved from that trip. I went and got it from my little collection of things from the past. I came back, I sat down at the microphone. This was all live on the air, and I said, here's my itinerary. I could be making this up, but let me tell you what I remember happening and what I've got documentation to show happened. And still he didn't want to accept it. Now, I would have thought that because I was challenging some of these flat earthers and their claims, that people would be able to see that I was not a flat earther. And yet, to this day, I still have people trying to say that I promoted flat earth or that I am a flat earther, even though that's the complete opposite of what I was saying. So I can completely understand your frustration with this flat earth thing that has taken over conspiracy culture. I get it. At the same time, though, I think if we try to say that anyone who questions things like war or dinosaurs or even heliocentrism itself, if we say that any of those people who question these things are falling into the same trap as flat earthers, that seems to me to be almost like a guilt by association or throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think if you do skepticism properly, if you have a proper methodological approach to the matter, well, you won't arrive at flat earth because the evidence goes against it. But you need to be willing to look at the evidence.
Flat earth. What do you think about flat earth?
Do the research. And so it was only through doing the research
I
that
think it's bullshit.
my current position,
It's a hot
which
crock
is
of
that
shit.
the heliocentric
Actually.
model that we're given today, I do think it is fanciful. But that doesn't mean that I accept flat earth. And I consider myself to be one of the leading flat earth skeptics in the world today. So that's where I'm at with all of this, Greg. I'm a skeptical person. I take the time to look at the official stories for some of these things, and I'm not rejecting them out of hand. So if I say war hoax, I'm not saying that all war is a hoax. And you could say that maybe I shouldn't use the word hoax, that's a too strong a word. I completely understand that. But at the same time, we live in a world where people are convinced of the most ridiculous things because of their conditioning through school. So
hoax,
I'm a
yeah.
war questioner, or I'm a war skeptic.
No.
Or I think war might be a deception. Well, just using terms like war hoax, it just cuts right through that. It says, right, I am willing to say that I think we've been deceived about war right from the get-go. If people don't like the use of the word hoax, I understand that. Hopefully they can understand why I do that. War hoax, evolution hoax, heliocentrism hoax. It cuts right to the chase and it says, look, I'm willing to put my cards on the table here. I no longer believe what I used to believe, and the reason for this is because I've taken the time to look into the official story, and I do not find it convincing.
And that's fair to say. And I'm with you on the conventional model. There's a lot of things that don't add up when you start to pick at it. So we're probably on the same page there. And I'm glad you brought up that show with Gordon White, because I've gotten a lot of feedback from all sides of the spectrum on how people feel about that, and a lot of pushback. And I think maybe some of the points, I made them casually and maybe made them too strong, but I think people misinterpreted what I was saying to a point, which was really that when I grew up in this culture, it was about trying to improve my own life, about avoiding debt traps and achieving economic fairness or escaping the cog in the wheel lifestyle, finding healthier options and creating solutions away from the weaponized food and water and now cell phones that we have to deal with. You know, things that can help us navigate to a better reality, even if it's just in our small circle. And I'm not sure these other topics like atomic weapons or dinosaurs or the flat earth, I'm not sure they do that. And I'm not saying questioning has no merit. Of course, I would never say that. But I just think it should be maybe measured, and maybe it's gone a little bit off the rails, and maybe people are obsessing over things they can't control at the expense of their own life and their own health and making themselves a better person. And it's not that all time is spent wisely either. So it's not even fair to say, you know, you should spend your time more wisely, because of course we have a lot of time and it isn't all spent wisely. So that's of limited use to bring up. But that's kind of where I was coming from on a lot of that stuff.
Greg, I completely understand what you're saying, and I can relate to it, and I can empathize with it. And you're correct, a lot of people, whether it is Flat Earth, or it is Pizzagate, or any of these sorts of things, a lot of people do let it take over. Maybe not their lives, but their interest in the alternative. And so when I got into all of this, I was the same as you. I got into this thinking, well, I've been deceived about things. What else have I been deceived about? And there was a reason I wanted to do this, because I wanted to improve my life. If I have been deceived about something, I want to know what else I've been deceived about, and hopefully improve my life as a result. And so in the last couple of years, for example, I've improved my diet significantly because I realized I had been deceived about nutrition and health.
Right.
And I've improved my exercise regime because I had been deceived about the ideal exercise regime. So now I sit here at the age of 31 and I'm in significantly better shape and significantly better health and better strength and fitness and flexibility than I was 5 or 6 years ago when I was in my mid-20s. And that's not because I was a couch potato in my mid-20s. I used to exercise then and I thought I was being healthy back then. But I had been deceived. And so by being willing to reconsider what I thought I know,
offered the opportunity for me to redo this because a lot of new stuff has come out, a lot of new abilities to produce things that weren't around. It's just amazing the technological things that have happened in the last decade. So I'm real excited about it. From the introduction, I'm sure a lot of you think, how could anybody be that messed up that he would get involved in that many things in one lifetime? Because at that point, I mean, I don't believe in reincarnation, amen? And so I was, doing all this stuff before I got born again, obviously. I stopped doing it then. And so to do all of these things, people say, well, first of all, what made you so evil? Yes, that's a good word for it, evil. Actually, I will try and share what I think the problem was, But I had very good parents. I had no excuses from that standpoint. I mean, I wasn't one of these poor
He's a
kids that was
dildo. That's why he's so
beaten or
evil.
locked in a closet or anything like that. I was, very much a Leave It to Beaver kid growing up. In fact, that was my favorite TV show. Not that had anything to do with it, but a couple of things happened. And the first one was essentially that I was out doing the trick-or-treat thing. And back then, see, I was born in 1949, so we're talking like probably 1959, 1960. You never heard anything about Halloween being bad back then. I mean, especially I happen to have been born and raised Catholic, very devout Catholic, and, some of you may not know this, the Catholic Church is actually what brought Halloween to America. So they saw nothing wrong with Halloween. Before the wave of Irish and German immigrants, and I can say this because I'm Irish and German.
Oh, he could say because he's
came over
Irish
here.
and German
Halloween was
part.
illegal. Did you know that?
Okay, that's permission.
Most of the 13 colonies and most
Good
of
thing
the
he
early
clarified
states,
that.
it was illegal.
Thank you.
But
there, Bill.
there was no
Sherman.
teaching on that. My parents didn't know anything about it, so they let me go out and do my little thing. And one year, I think it was about 11, 12 years old, I was out walking with my best buddy. It was a beautiful, starry October night, and they were walking down the street. And I just happened to look up in the sky, because I was sort of an astronomy buff even as a kid.
He was, man, back in
And
the
I
day.
saw, I just was frozen by what I saw, because instead of the sky being full of stars, instead it was like this black cavern.
Huh.
And it was covered with black leathery things from
What the
horizon to horizon. And it looked, the only way I can describe it is what I've seen on TV. It's like being inside of a cave that's full of bats. There's just like thousands of bats. Except these things had little red eyes, which I don't think really bats have that feature. And they were staring down at me with these red eyes. And I could feel these eyes like going into my soul, just like burning their way into the very heart of my being. And I felt this thrill, this kind of unclean thrill go through me. I had no idea what it was. And I just sort of stopped, and I was transfixed by this. And I just stared there, and it was almost like I was impaled by those eyes. I couldn't move. And my friend had kept walking, and he stopped and noticed I was kind of going like that. And he said, "Hey, Bill, what's going on?"
Bill
And I looked at him, and I looked
Schneeberlin
back up at the sky, and the sky
takes
was
it
back.
in
There
the
were the stars again.
bud.
The spell, so to speak, was broken. But from that time on, I began to have a fascination for things outre, for things weird. I started, in fact, believe it or not, by I think the age of 13, I was already involved with getting into UFOs, parapsychology, haunted houses, ESP, all of this
Haunted
stuff.
houses.
And that's kind of remarkable for someone who was never allowed to see a horror movie, never allowed, I don't think I saw a science fiction movie until I was 14 or 15 years old.
What?
Because, of course, back then there wasn't much
What a
on
dork.
TV, and my parents wouldn't let me go to those kind of things. So here I am, I'm getting into all this stuff. Why? And I got really obsessed with UFOs. I would read everything I get my hands on, which in those days was not an awful lot. I was a member of NICAP, which is the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, which is one of the earlier UFO organizations. And in fact, when my parents would drive around the country on vacation, I'd have to arm wrestle my dad into stopping and visiting all these UFO sites, like or a haunted house, a famous haunted house, or some cemetery where the gravestone moved around, or some bizarre thing or other. I mean, I was addicted to weirdness. Let's face it. So, I think
Maybe
that can
like
partially be
14
traced
things.
back to that very thing, to the fact that I had, my
14
parents had
sciences.
unwittingly allowed me to walk out on a night which is considered by Satanists to be the devil's birthday, and to be out there unprotected, because it never occurred to my parents to pray for me before I went out the door on Halloween night. And I was out there unprotected. So then, the next thing that happened is even at that point, from the time I was a youngster, I wanted to be a Catholic priest. That was my avid desire. I mean, so bad that when I was a little kid, I would actually cut up my mother's bed sheets and color them to make them into vestments. So I had it bad. And so I went to Loras College, which was the minor seminary college in Iowa,
such a
for
dork, though.
people that want to be a priest.
Investments.
Now,
like, what
an
the
interesting
fuck?
thing, a funny
What a
thing happened
dildo.
on the way to the priesthood, as they say. What happened was, there was a professor of theology, because of course if you're going to be a priest, you take theology courses. And there was a professor of theology, a layman, who nevertheless had a PhD. And he started telling us all how, first of all, got to understand this, the Catholic Church teaches that the priest is another Christ.
What?
In other words, when you go up on that altar and you hold up the host or you hold up the chalice and you say, for this is my body, or for this is the blood of the new covenant, etc., you are acting as Christ at that moment. You are literally Jesus Christ, quote unquote, at that moment. And so, he said, well, if you want to be like Christ, this professor told us, you have to do the kind of stuff Christ did. And that made sense, And then he says, well, you know what Jesus did? He went out and studied under the gurus in India. He went to Egypt and studied under the Magi. He studied with the lamas in Tibet, and he told this story about how there's this monastery where we have all these scrolls that talk about this wise person that came to Tibet called Isa, and that Isa was actually Jesus. And so he said, if you want to be like Christ, if you want to be another Christ, then you have to learn these occult techniques. This is how Jesus turned water into wine. This is how Jesus healed people, walked on water, etc. So, what did I know? I was like 18 or 19 years old. This guy was, had a PhD, and he was a highly respected professor. So I started going out and getting books on the occult, which were few and far between. I actually had to join an occult book of the month club in order to get them, because anywhere in the town I was living in Dubuque, there was nothing. And I finally got a hold of a book on witchcraft, and it was by a lady named Sybil Leek. And she was the first female witch to come out and actually teach that witchcraft is a religion. That it isn't just, like the Wizard of Oz, this green ugly lady with warts, who flies around a broomstick and goes, like that. No. That witches are actually a religious group, just like Buddhists are, just like Jews are, just like whatever. And so that intrigued me, because it looked like here's a religion that is part of its religious practice actually teaches you how to be psychic, how to do these things. And especially when I read in some witchcraft book that Jesus was a witch, that he had his coven of 12 apostles, and because there's a coven of 13, that's the size of a witch coven, and that each of the apostles had a working partner who was a woman, and that Jesus, of course, had Mary Magdalene. Now this is like 40 years ago, so all this foofara about the Da Vinci Code or whatever. Well, we knew about this stuff 40 years ago. So anyway, I decided I got to be a witch. I was about a sophomore in college at this point. I wrote to the king of the witches. I figured, hey, let's go right to the top, right? And his name was Alex Sanders, and he was a high-level witch in London. And he gave me the address of a nearby coven where I could go and be initiated, because witchcraft is an initiatic religion. You have to go and have someone sort of, kind of zap you to get into witchcraft. So this is an example of me when I was in college practicing witchcraft. Some people say I looked like Jerry Garcia, but I don't know if I think that's a compliment or not. Anyhow, as you can see, I was kind of the typical hippie witch, this is actually taken because I was also making movies at the time, and this was a portrait for the film I was directing. While in college, I did all sorts of things which I don't have time to go into, but I learned how to do trance mediumship. I learned how to do even like occult exorcisms, things like that. So it was a pretty wild ride. By the time I was I think a senior in college, I decided I didn't want to be a Catholic priest anymore. Big surprise. For one thing, I'd been at the St. Rose Priory at that time. Was a Dominican seminary in Dubuque, and the guy there was actually practicing the occult. The professors were doing ceremonial magic and thaumaturgy. In fact, how many of you have heard of Matthew Fox? Anybody? Guess not. Well, you're probably not up on apostate teachers. Matthew Fox is a very popular writer among very liberal Catholics and Episcopalians and New Agers. And he's the one who coined the term creation spirituality. Creation spirituality is the worship of the earth and the worship of sexuality. It's a kind of an academic word for witchcraft. Well, he was at this seminary at that time. He was a Dominican priest. About, I think, 10 or 12 years ago, he was kicked out of the Dominican order by the Roman Church for being a heretic, but the Episcopalians took him in. So anyway, you know, I'll just let that drop and you can decide what you want about it. So I decided I didn't want to do the celibacy thing because I was reading all this stuff in witchcraft about how you have to have a man and a woman, male and female, yin and yang, goddess and god, you know, so I figured I didn't want to spend my life being celibate. And so I took a leave of absence when I graduated from college and instead became a music teacher. And oddly enough, in a Catholic school. So here I was, a practicing witch, teaching music in a Catholic high school. And I had a pentagram around my neck, and you know, I wore it on top of my necktie and everything every day to work. And I taught the nuns how to do yoga and astrology, and I was giving, you know, tarot card readings at the church fairs to raise money for the school. And can't imagine why they ultimately fired me, can you? Anyway, they only fired me after I raised so much money for them. I don't know. Anyhow, along the way, while I was teaching there, I was doing all this magic because I needed a working partner. I needed a priestess. And I ran into my wife. This is a picture taken of her at that time, Sharon. And I put some of these pictures in here because some people have claimed I really don't have a Sharon. I just made her up to make me look better.
He made her up.
You know, because they say, well, she never comes with you. She never speaks, incel. You know, whatever. And I said, here she is. This is Sharon. So, you know, now you know what she looks like. At this time, we already had a coven of 6 members. This was in 1972. This is a picture of me drawing down the moon on Sharon. That's a ritual that's done where basically you believe the moon goddess comes down and possesses the high priestess of the coven, and then she speaks like an oracle to the people. That's done every full moon. This is our wedding. We were married in 1974 in a witch wedding. Our wedding cake was a Vulcan Idic, for those of you that might have been into Star Trek at some point. That's the sacred symbol of the planet Vulcan.
He's a dork.
And we, of course, blurred out the faces of some of the people present because we didn't want to have them get mad at me.
Okay.
This is our wedding portrait. The guy in black there was one of the major leading witches in Milwaukee, although this actually was done in a park in Dubuque. You can see we're both kind of the quintessential flower children, you know, with flowers in our hair and green robes and all of that kind of stuff. So that was, and then at that point, we went and went down and studied in Arkansas for a while under the Grand Master Druid of North America. And he's the one that actually taught us a lot of the other things we needed to get into, because he highly recommended that I should get involved with Freemasonry, that I should get involved with Mormonism if I had an opportunity, that these were organizations were full of occult Luciferian knowledge if one knew how to manipulate it. This is a post-wedding portrait of Sharon. I just put that in there because I'm so proud of my wife. It doesn't have anything to do with the occult, but I just think she's a cutie. Anyhow, still do. Anyway, so this is, we moved to Milwaukee in 1974, because there were 80 people there that wanted us to train them how to be witches. And so we went there, and partly because I couldn't get a job in Dubuque, it was a bad period in the economy. And so we had class after class after class where we were teaching people witchcraft. And we were the ancillary stuff too, you know, astrology, tarot cards, mediumship, parapsychology, astral travel. And we just, you know, we were virtually a little free university. We'd have a semester, and we'd have about 10 or 15 people. We'd train them, and then we'd run them through, and then and I see you can only have 13 members in a coven. And so we set up 2 or 3 different covens, and Sharon became a witch queen, which means someone who has a high priestess who has several covens.
I wrote a short story about this.
One of the people in the coven,
Dude's Adventures, kind of,
at that time, happened to have a dad who was the junior warden of a Masonic lodge in Heartland, Wisconsin. Now, a junior warden is like one of the top 3 officers in a local Masonic body. And so I thought, well, this high-level druid, the Grand Master of all druids in North America, whose name, oddly enough, was Eli, he said if I ever had an opportunity to join the Masons, do so. So I had said, well, can this guy get me into the Masons? And so he did. And you see there, that's my certificate for, I don't know how well you can see it, but all of these things are in my books if you want to see better documentation. On March 24th, 1977, I was finally raised to the sublime degree of a Master Mason, which is the top of the Blue Lodge degrees. Subsequently, I went on and went through York Rite, went through Scottish Rite, and went through the Shrine. So basically, I did essentially everything one could do in Masonry and even some stuff that most people can't do in Masonry, as we'll see later. Along the way, now this might seem a radical change of direction, but a funny thing happened to me. I had just been made a high priest of the Druidic Order. I was a high priest of witchcraft, and we were down in Chicago visiting some friends at the Temple of the Pagan Way, which is another occult organization. Chicago is full of them. Anyway, we all got together, and guess what movie was playing at that time? Big, huge movie, The Exorcist. And so we thought, oh, this will be a kick. Let's go see the movie. And so there were like 3 sets of high priest, high priestess witches. 3 couples, plus the guy who was the head of the Temple of the Pagan Way in Chicago. And we all sat in this theater, and we were all scared to death.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it was so funny because this lady who was sitting next to me wasn't Sharon. She was like another high priestess. She grabbed my hand in this like death grip and wouldn't let it go for the whole movie. And I don't know if any of you have defiled your minds by seeing that film, but that is probably the evilest movie ever made. And it was so profoundly scary and evil, for reasons I don't have time to go into, that the fellow who we were staying with down there, who happened to be an epileptic, he actually had a grand mal seizure that
this
night.
is fucking
It was
gay.
it had hit his nervous system that violently. And it kind of scared me, and I thought, well, gee, maybe I should do something with this Catholic thing. I kind of put the whole Catholic scene aside. Well, as it happens, I heard through a friend of mine who ran an occult bookstore that there was an old Roman Catholic church in town. Now, probably none of you even heard of the old Roman Catholic Church, but what it is, it's a branch of the Church of Utrecht in Holland, which was cut away from the Vatican by various Protestant Catholic divisions back in the 1700s. And so this has existed as a whole separate parallel church to the Catholic Church. The only difference is 1, they allow a married clergy, 2, they say the Mass in the vernacular, and 3, they do not accept the last 2 councils, in other words, Vatican I or Vatican II. So this fellow was willing to ordain me, get me ordained to the priesthood, in exchange for me ordaining him a witch priest. So he kind of, swapped initiations. So this is a picture of me. This is actually during the ordination ceremony this is in St. Paul's Church, Old Catholic Church in Joliet, Illinois. There's my certificate.
I've been to Joliet,
June 5th, 1976.
Kind of a shithole, to be honest.
I already explained about the Roman Rite of Utrecht.
Chicago.
This is another shot of the same thing where I'm kneeling, and the bishop there is about to lay hands on me. Notice his little Dagon fish hat that he's wearing. That's very important. Okay, so, and all this, you see, it was like I was gathering power. This is how I looked at it, because, see, this druid guy had explained to me that there's all these different currents of occult power. And I explain all this in my book, Lucifer Dethroned, but like for all of the, you have the 13 members of Jesus' coven, right? And each one of those apostles had a certain current of power that went out from him. Like, for example, the Johannine current of power was the Freemasons. The Petrine current for Peter was the Roman Church, and so on and so on and so on. And so it was like I was going around picking up these things, sort of like, hash marks on my spiritual aura or whatever. So that's what I was doing. I wasn't just being, people might think, well, what kind of a wacko person is a witch and goes and is ordained a Catholic priest? Well, it's not as strange as you think, and we'll explore more about that later. Anyhow, once I'd gone this far, another thing happened.
Such a bitch.
This same friend who stood up at my wedding as my best man, he owned this occult bookstore in Milwaukee I referred to, and he said, one day he came up to me and he says, you really ought to read this book. and he handed me a copy of the Satanic Bible. Now, if you talk to anybody who's a white witch, they'll say, oh, witches aren't Satanists. Witches don't believe in Satan. We worship nature. You know, we're out skipping through the woods, gathering herbs and worshiping the gentle goddess and the great God. You know, tra-la-la. So, you know, this was sort of odd because this guy was supposedly a Wiccan. But he said, this guy has some good ideas. So I read the book and I found out that indeed Anton LaVey, who wrote the Satanic Bible, the guy who was the head of the Church of Satan for many years, that he did have some interesting ideas. And you see, this is how it works. Once you set your foot in this direction, you know, you get more deceived, you get more deceived. You know, it's not like I woke up, you know, one morning when I was a high school kid and said, I want to worship the devil.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it was a gradual process. And especially when you understand that the Church of Satan doesn't worship the devil. How many of you realize that? The Church of Satan does not worship the devil. They just view the devil as a symbol, as an archetype. Now, there are, of course, Satanists that do worship the devil, but that's why basically we call the Church of Satan comic opera Satanism, because it's really not that serious a thing. Not that it's not dangerous, but compared to other forms of Satanism, it's not that dangerous. So I went through the first degree of the Church of Satan and then made it all the way up to second degree. You'll notice there, that's my certificate. I was made a warlock in the Church of Satan. You'll notice there down at the bottom is Anton LaVey's autograph. I have the dubious distinction of having his autograph. I want to note that in the last paragraph, it says, the Church of Satan, having passed before the Council of Nine, order of the trapezoid, by all the powers of hell, so it is done. That's kind of like saying amen. Well, notice that order of the trapezoid, because that's going to be important later. This is what set me on what occultists call the left-hand path. And from then on, I was both pursuing Masonry and many other things, and still doing the Catholic priest thing, but I was also doing the satanic thing. Now, you might think, how could anybody do that at the same time? Well, you've got to realize, first of all, once you get past the basic Satanism of Anton LaVey's church, you discover that in order to be a practicing satanic priest, you first of all had to be a Catholic priest. Did you realize that? Now, this is not intended as a slam on Catholicism, although there's certainly a talk there somewhere. But the problem is that, you see, the classical black mass, les messes noires in the French, is a ritual that's an inversion of the Catholic ceremony, the Catholic liturgy that you've all probably seen pictures of if you've not actually attended one. And except they have the cross upside down, the priest wears dark vestments, and they have a naked woman on the altar. And what they do is they believe that the host is really the body of Jesus. And so they abuse this host. They stomp on it, they urinate on it, they do things I won't even describe to it, and they believe by doing that they're torturing Jesus. Now this is bizarre, I know, but this is what they believe. And so it's really handy if you can have a priest there to do his hocus pocus. Now, how many of you realize the word hocus pocus comes from the Latin Mass? Did you know that? It was a thing that Protestants came up with to make fun of Catholics. Because the words in Latin, the priest picks up the host, and he says, for this is my body. And what that is Latin is hoc est inem corpus meum. So it's like hocus pocus. And the idea that you say this as a priest, and poof, this piece of bread turns into the body of Jesus. Body, blood, soul, and divinity. And ditto with the wine. So anyway, then if you were actually a Catholic priest who was also a satanic priest, you could do the satanic mass, have the host right there, and you could abuse it to your heart's content, and thereby thinking you were somehow insulting, Jesus Christ up in heaven. So it's not as bizarre as you think. If you look at the history of Satanism, most of the prominent Satanists were also Catholic priests or Catholic bishops. I'll just name two. Aleister Crowley, some of you may have heard of him. He was consecrated a bishop in the old Roman Church. And also Anton LaVey. Believe it or not, he ended up doing the same thing I did. He got a Greek Orthodox bishop, who shall remain nameless, to consecrate him a bishop in return for him making the Greek Orthodox bishop a priest of Satan. So it gets kind of fuzzy here, folks. Now here you see me in my ceremonial magical garb. I was involved in all sorts of high-level magic, including thalamic magic, which means magic that's based on the works of Aleister Crowley, who was the most prominent black magician of the last century, and Enochian magic, which has nothing to do with like Enoch in the Bible. It's a very complicated thing that was brought forth by Dr. John Dee, who was the original 007. Have you heard of Dr. John Dee? He was Queen Elizabeth I. This is way back 400 years ago. Queen Elizabeth's premier spy. And he was also a high-level occultist, an alchemist, and a ceremonial magician. And she would send him into Europe to spy on different countries, and he would send missives back, and he'd always sign his name 007. That was his little code designation. That's where Ian Fleming got the thing for James Bond. So anyhow, see all this interesting trivia you're picking up here? Anyway, at this time I was also a member of the Brotherhood. And that's hardcore Satanism. See, if you think of it like this, you could think of the Church of Satan as kind of like marijuana, and hardcore Satanism is like cocaine or acid or heroin or something. So it's like a gateway into deeper, darker levels of the occult. And along the way, I had to sign my name in the black book. I had to sell my soul to the devil. I didn't know the devil already had my soul. But, you know, I made a pact. And the pact was that for 7 years, I would serve Satan faithfully, that he would have me body, soul, and spirit. He would give me anything I requested, wine, women, song, drugs, power, whatever I wanted I could have. In exchange for that, at the end of 7 years, he'd get to kill me and take me to hell. What a deal. How many of you want to sign up? You got to realize, Satanists are taught that there's this kind of, I don't know if you've heard of the philosopher Nietzsche, but Nietzsche taught that Christians were like slave mentality, and that the true masters were the Ubermen, the supermen. And so the idea was that Christians were all losers. They would go to heaven, which is boring because you sit around all day and twang on a harp while sitting on a cloud and saying, oh, you're so great, oh, you're so wonderful, you know, and it's boring. That's what we were told. Whereas if you go to hell, it's like sex, drugs, rock and roll, day and night for all eternity. You get to party hardy for all eternity. And so the masters go to hell. The slaves go to heaven. The wolves go to hell. The sheep go to heaven. That's the way we looked at it. In fact, I was taught at one point, think of it this way. What's the greatest thing a Christian can do for the Lord? Think about it. To be a martyr. To give your life for the faith. Because the word martyr means witness. That's what it literally means in Greek. And at the same time, this Satanist leader said to me, what's the greatest thing a Satanist can do is kill a Christian. So it's like a symbiotic relationship, just like the wolf kills the sheep. So the Satanist kills the Christian.
Win.
And the Christian gets his great blessings, and the Satanist gets his great blessings. It's a win-win situation. Now, you see how twisted all this is? You see, but there's enough truth in it to sell it. Anyway, I got more and more into these things, very, very strange stuff going on. At one point, I'd gone through different levels of initiation in ceremonial magic, and I'd done some very powerful rituals. And I had this experience. I had happened to go home to visit, because this time we were living in Milwaukee. And I had gone home to visit my folks who lived in a little farm town in Iowa. And I was staying in my old bedroom. And for some reason, Sharon hadn't come with me.
Okay,
and all of a sudden, I felt like I was lifted out of my bed, carried through the roof of my bedroom, and I was sailing through the sky, through the stars, to the moons of Saturn. Now, that's pretty weird. And mind you, I was not on any drugs at this point. No funny cigarettes or recreational vegetables whatsoever. Okay. And I ended up landing on this moon of Saturn, and there was this obscenely bizarre-looking temple there. It was all totally black, totally out of whack. The angles were all wrong. spikes sticking out of it. It looked like a loathsome, diseased kind of black thing crouching on the plains of this moon. And I was told to go in, and I went inside, and there was this gentleman there who was my occult mentor, and he was wearing a white robe, and he kind of glowed in the dark like Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars movies, you know. Well, anyhow, he says, "Welcome to the Cathedral of Pain."
Yeah.
Now, somehow it didn't sound very good to me, but what could I do? I was out in the middle of outer space, you know. And so I walk into this thing, and it's an enormous thing like a cathedral, just huge. Except instead of stained glass windows along the walls, there was these, like, imagine like giant aquariums, floor-to-ceiling aquariums, full of some kind of fluid in this green light bathing them. And except instead of pictures or whatever, floating in these two aquariums on both sides of the room were countless naked dead bodies, mutilated, horrible looking, you know, just floating there, including dead babies, dead children, dead adults, the whole bit. And I was just getting horrible feelings about this. There was this altar which was shaped like a trapezoid made out of girders in the middle of the room, and there was this huge throne made out of steel girders in the far side of this cathedral, kind of like if you were in like a Anglican or Catholic church, you know, in the rear. Well, what happened was, I was told to lay down on this altar, and they tied me to this altar. And this is all happening in this dream. Was it a dream? I don't know. What happens? All these people come out in black robes, and they start chanting. And for some reason, they're chanting in French. And for some reason, I understand French, even though I don't. And they're saying all these blasphemous things against the Almighty, which I won't even repeat. Just cursing over and over again. And it's like they're trying to raise a level of power. And all of a sudden, this figure materializes on this throne in the rear of this huge cathedral. And it's this giant, ghastly figure, probably 25, 30 feet high. And it's like scintillating back and forth between this gorgeous-looking man with long, flowing hair to becoming like a winged bull, to becoming like a goat with wings and a human body. And it would go back and forth, like scintillating. So at the end, this thing gets up off the throne, and the chanting's getting more and more fierce and more frenzied. And he comes down, and every time he steps, the whole floor shakes. And he comes up to where I'm laying on this altar, and he has this vast hand that's like, 4 feet long, from thumb to finger, and talons. And he takes this finger and he pokes it right through my forehead like this talon, and it like sears into my brain, and I feel this like energy just burning my brain with white hot pain. And he said in this cavernous, sepulchral, Darth Vader type voice, "Now you belong to me, body, soul, and spirit forever."
Ooh.
And my brain like exploded at that point, and I felt myself hurtling back to Earth in a fireball. And I landed in the backyard of my parents' house. I'm laying there stark naked in the middle of this burning circle of fire on the lawn. and I had a scar on my forehead, which is still faintly visible to this day, 20 years later. And it was like, whoa, you know, what happened here? And I kind of staggered back into the house. I had the mother of all headaches. And I didn't know what to make of it. But from then on, that was my Luciferian initiation, even though I didn't know it at the time. Soon after that, I was invited to join the Illuminati.
It's such a bullshit.
Now, what's the Illuminati? Well, we're going to talk about it a lot tonight, but basically it's the mother of all conspiracies. And it means literally a society of illuminated men and women who have received the light of Lucifer. Because remember, Lucifer means the light bearer, right? So anyway, I was walking around in this state of white fog in my brain, and I was getting more and more tempted to do evil things, more and more. I mean, it was like whatever vestige of humanity was gradually being eaten away by this cancer of evil. So then I got to the point of what's called the abyss in high-level magic, where you have to cross the abyss, and then you transcend good and evil, and you're on the final approach to becoming a living God. And in order to do that, I had to make a choice. In the system of magic I was working, I had two choices. I could either be a werewolf or a vampire. Now, a lot of you might think, huh?
Do you think you really had the choice to be a vampire?
You know, this guy's been, you know...
Tell me why.
Eating too many stale pizzas or what? But no, I had to make that choice. And I knew people who'd been into lycanthropy, which is the technical medical term for being a werewolf. And I knew it hurt a lot. I mean, you think about it. I mean, your nose starts growing out, and you grow like 2 feet taller, and this and that and the other thing. So it's not very fun. Plus the stuff you have to do to become a werewolf, the rituals are so unspeakable, I won't even offend your ears by telling you what they are. So I'd always kind of had this fascination for vampires anyhow, because they're kind of sexy and everything, you know. So I thought, okay, I can do that. I can be a vampire. So I was ultimately initiated into a vampire cult down in a Russian Orthodox splinter group in Chicago, and I started having all of these sort of semi-vampiric symptomologies like I couldn't go out in sunlight, I couldn't get within 50 feet of garlic,
Oh my God!
because
What a
garlic's a
bullshitter.
blood purifier, you see. And I had to sleep in a specially designed coffin. I mean, and I'm sure you're all thinking about this, but this guy's a total wacko.
Yeah, you are.
Well,
You do think
no. And if you look around what's happening today, I mean, I was doing this stuff in 1978. What's going on today is you're seeing a whole culture developing of vampires. You may have seen, like, they have programs on them, like on the History Channel or the Discovery Channel. There's vampire nightclubs. There's vampire churches. They're out in the open, which was then secret 25 years ago, is now out in the open. And
vampires in the
people
east,
ask, well, what did you do? How
vampires
did
in the
you
west,
survive?
vampires up north.
Well, the funny thing is I couldn't eat
south.
anything.
There are vampires.
I couldn't even drink water.
And rumors of the vampires.
Water would just
and
sit
we're thinking
in my
of the vampires. Cause we're sinking
like
all the
molten
vampires.
glass. The only
We're
thing
gonna
I
tie
could
them
do
to stones.
was every day
Dip
I
'em in
would
big
celebrate
buckets
a
made out of
Catholic
butter,
Mass and take
mixed with
communion.
garlic too.
And then about once or twice a week,
we say
with
vampires.
increasing frequency, I
Rumors
had
of the vampires.
women in my coven
Van Helsing's
who
coming
were
for
willing to
you.
let me bite them
He's
in their
gonna kick
neck
your
and
butt.
drink blood. And so that was how I survived for more than a year. I mean, I probably didn't have more than,
The mommy rat's so great, bitch.
40 calories a day.
You know?
And yet I survived. It's all satanic. It's all demonic. And I believed that if I were to die, I would rise from the grave 3 days later as a vampire. And see, this group taught me that Lazarus was the first vampire in the New Testament, in the book of John. And that Jesus was initiating people into vampirism. They said, why do you think Jesus said that, if you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will live forever? See how the devil can take something and twist
it up.
Or Jesus' statement that there are some standing here right now that will not taste death until they see the kingdom of heaven coming.
What do you think about that?
And that enigmatic thing at the end of John's Gospel, where it talks about all, what is it to you if I want the beloved disciple, who we understand to be John, to tarry until I come, meaning the second advent. And so these people actually said that the head of this whole vampire cult was the Apostle John, who is now 2,000 years old, and he was a vampire. So I'm going, you know, and it makes sense in a weird, twisted sort of way if you don't know your Bible. If you don't understand the scriptures. And again, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And of course, I never got any theological training, even though I went through a Catholic college, even though I went through as part of my priesthood training and got a master's degree in Catholic theology from a Roman Catholic seminary. I never read the epistles of Paul. I knew the gospel story vaguely, and oddly enough, I was fascinated with the book of Revelations. I kept reading it and reading it and reading it, but I couldn't understand it. It was like, you know, of course, I'm not saying I understand it now completely either, amen, but I mean, it was a very hard book to get at. And so I didn't know what I was doing, and I was being deceived. Moving along, I finally got involved with a group called the Ecclesia Gnostica Spiritualis, which is an old Catholic group, and the guy who was the head of that, who was probably the evilest man I've ever met, he consecrated me a bishop. And at the same time, I was raised to the 90th degree of Egyptian Freemasonry, which is the ancient and primitive rite of Memphis Mizraim. And I know you probably can't see that certificate very well, which is just as well because it's in French. Anyway, on that, it's available in a better format that you can see in. I think it's in Lucifer Dethroned. Soon after that, now this is ironic, in regular American Masonry, I went through the Scottish Rite. And this is my degree certificate for being made as a member of the Scottish Rite. Then I was to the Shriner. Can you imagine this? This is me as a Shriner. I don't think you can see that picture that well, but I'm wearing the funny little fez thing and everything, and it's the ancient Arabic order of the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine. And I don't know how many of you realize this, but I'm sure if you go to some large city like Kansas City, they have some big fancy shrine temple, and you hear about the wonderful hospitals for crippled children and blah, blah, blah. But when Shriners become Shriners, they swear an oath in the name of Allah, and they swear it on the Quran. So it is not anywhere near a Christian organization. None of Masonry is. See, Masonry was part of the deception that drew me into all of this. But that's a whole nother talk. I'm going to get into that in a few minutes. My second last step was I became a Mormon, and let me tell you how that happened. Mormon? You know, what's this? Well, as I said, I was into this vampire thing. I was getting, you see, vampirism, let me tell you, there's a reason why Yahweh God tells us do not drink blood. He said that to Noah, he said that to Moses, and it's even in the book of Acts in chapter 15. Because blood is the ultimate addiction. Because the blood is the life. And I had to keep drinking more of it, and more of it, and more of it. And I was saying Mass every day, and it got to the point where like 3 or 4 times a week, I had to have one of the women in my come and let me bite them in the neck. And once I got so carried away with bloodlust, I took too much. I had the girl pass out on me, which was pretty scary. Fortunately, my wife has a lot of nursing training, and she was able to tell nothing was seriously wrong. She just sort of had an attack of pernicious anemia. But at the time, the only job I had, because, you know, what do you do when you can't go out in the daytime? I was working as a box man for the Milwaukee Sentinel, which meant I drove around in the middle of the night and put the newspapers in boxes for the morning newspaper. And I drive, you know, you're driving through the streets of Milwaukee and 2 in the morning, who do you see? Mainly prostitutes and the occasional homeless person. And I was the white knuckling it on the steering wheel. I was so trying to fight off the urge, just jump out of my truck, pounce on one of these hookers, and just rip her throat out. It was getting that bad. And I was just, what am I supposed to do here? What am I supposed to do? And the funny thing is along the way, I asked for help, and I was asking for it from the devil. But the funny thing is sometimes Yahweh will come along when you're praying to the wrong deity, and he'll say, "Excuse me, I'll take this call." And that's just what he did. He answered that prayer. Because what happened is that all of a sudden, I got a check back. Every year I was sending a check to the Church of Satan, my dues. And I got it back from the bank, and some lady from the San Francisco bank where the Church of Satan does its banking had written on it, "I'll be praying for you in the name of Jesus." And I just thought that was so inane, because at this point I was so deceived. I thought Jesus was the son of Satan. He'd been killed on the cross. as a sacrifice to the evil god Jehovah to save mankind from enslavement. That's how 180 degrees off I was. So I just laughed and, forgot about it. Well, the funny thing was, within a couple days, something hit me like a Mack truck. I lost all my magical power. I got sick as a dog. I lost all my vampiric power. It was like I was flat on my face, I felt like I was hitting bottom big time. And I couldn't figure out what was going on, And so I kept saying, Lucifer, you promised me that if I did all these things for you, I would have all this power, all of this wealth, women, whatever, And here I am basically ruined, because that's what he is. He's a welcher. The devil will promise you anything and then deliver virtually nothing. And the funny thing is, who should come up from from Chicago to visit us in Milwaukee? A couple of teenage satanic groupies who wanted to meet the great Magister Templey, that was me, who at that time I was so sick as a dog I could barely sit in my chair and look impressive. And so they came in and they said, we brought you these Christian comic books because they're so funny. There's one book called Spellbound and one book called Angel of Light, and they're about the occult, and they're so stupid, And they'd even written obscene things in them and made black the teeth out on the characters in the book and stuff. So anyway, I just glanced at them, couldn't be bothered. The interesting thing is in all those years, we lived 10 years in Milwaukee. No Christian ever came and witnessed to us. Not even a Jehovah's Witness came and witnessed to us. Not even the Mormons came to visit us. We lived in the same place in the heart of downtown Milwaukee. Never. So that's what Yahweh had to do. He had to have Satanists bring me the gospel. Because at that time, till this day, in the back of those comic books was how to get born again. But I couldn't be bothered. I had too much ego. They say it's the hardest thing of all is for someone who's prideful to get saved. And I was full of pride. Even though I was flat on my face, I was full of pride. Well, what's funny is once I rejected that, there's a knock on the door about a day later. We open the door, and it's Mormon missionaries. Now, the funny thing is that this high-level Druid guy, I alluded to this earlier, he told me that if I ever got in trouble, that we should join the Mormon church because their church was started by witches for witches, as a place where you could hang out and appear to be this very square, straight, white bread, Republican, conservative, Christian type person, and it believe almost all the same things witches do. And so we thought, well, this is our answer to, prayer, quote unquote. So we joined the LDS church in 1980, went to the Salt Lake Temple in 1981.
In 1988.
That's a whole nother story we don't have time for. I became an Elders Quorum president in 1982. You'll notice there the graphic is my last temple recommend. That's like your American Express card for the Celestial Kingdom in Mormonism. Because if you can't go to the temple, you're damned. And this is a special card that allowed me to go to the temple and do work for the dead and to get my own endowment so I could be married for time and eternity to my wife, etc., etc. So this is just sort of documentation. Yes, I was indeed in the Mormon church.
Bullshit.
However, I tell people,
they're freaks too.
If Yahweh can use a donkey to preach, he can even get someone saved by using the Mormon church. Because for the first time in my life, as a Mormon, I was trying to be good. Well, I should say since I was a kid. Because if you're a witch, you don't worry about breaking the Ten Commandments. If you're a Satanist, you want to break at least one a day. But for the first time in my life, I was trying to be a good Christian, because Mormons have very high standards. They're very much like the same ethics, the same morality as what any Christian church will teach you. But what I didn't realize is you can't try to be a Christian. Amen? It's like sleeping in a garage and thinking you're a Cadillac. You can't do it. Either you are a Christian or you aren't a Christian. And it's by faith. It's not by how many good deeds you can rack up. Because, see, the Mormon church has over 4,000 commandments it has to keep to be a good Mormon. The 613 commandments that are in the Torah aren't enough. They added another 3,000.
Now I can't follow the religion, so I'm going to have to conquer the world.
So,
It's their fault.
I was buried in trying to be righteous. And I realized I couldn't do it. And then what happened was they called me to be a professional teacher of theology for the Church Institute of Religion. And they asked me to teach a course in the New Testament. Now, the Mormons use the King James Bible. See, I tell people, you know, even a broken clock is right twice a day, amen? So everybody gets something right. And so here I am for the first time in my life, I'm like 34 years old, I'm actually reading the Bible from cover to cover. I'm actually reading Paul's epistles. And I read Galatians, and I read Romans, and I realized there was no way Paul could have been a Mormon. And so I wrestled, and I struggled, and I prayed, and I fasted, and this is a longer story than I want to get into. But ultimately, I studied my way out of the LDS Church. And finally, on June 22nd, 1984, I remembered those comic books. And I figured I'd tried everything else. You know, I might as well try this. And so I took off my magic Mormon underwear because I didn't want any static on the line when I prayed. And I got the comic book out and put it on the bed and knelt at the foot of the bed and prayed the sinner's prayer, quote unquote. And at that moment, Yeshua, Jesus, saved me from my sins and became the Lord of my life. Hallelujah. Amen. Let's give him a praise offering for that. So, that is quite a long story, and yet I wanted you to understand how deception works and how it's a gradual process. And yet from the moment that lady started praying for me, I started moving on an upward trajectory. Because Mormonism, as bad as it is a vast improvement over being a Satanist. Amen? Okay. Now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty stuff here. That was just lightweight stuff. We're going to explain about the Illuminati and its origins. Essentially, anytime you study, you know, and let me just say this. Anybody who says that there isn't a conspiracy out there, you know, and you get this all the time, even from Christians. Oh, you're a conspiracy nut, you know, blah, blah, blah. And they obviously don't know the Bible from a doorknob, because you can see the history of a conspiracy, both in the celestial realm with Satan himself and his minions, and down here on the earth, tracked all through both testaments. And, you know, even the second Psalm, you know, about the kings of the earth conspiring against the Lord and against his anointed. I mean, this is a conspiracy. So if anybody says, "Oh, you're just a conspiracy nut," you just say, "Hallelujah, thank you." You know, and explain why you're thanking them. Anyhow, you can't study this conspiracy without studying Freemasonry. See, Masonry, while itself is kind of benign in some ways, I mean, it's not like, and I don't want by any of this, I'm not wanting you to think that, oh, Satanists are running around cutting up cats or killing people or, you know, torturing, because most Masons are nice people. They're just deceived to their toenails. But they're not evil people, except in the sense that we're all evil people until we get saved. But Masonry has been like the carrier wave, if you understand radio, upon which the conspiracy has traveled down through the millennia. It's been called many things. It's been called the Dionysian artificers. It's been called the Gnostics, etc., etc. We'll get into more of that in a little bit, but Masonry traces its own history back, of all things, to the Tower of Babel. They claim Nimrod was the greatest Mason who ever lived after the flood. Before the flood, they associate the origin of the original Mason with Tubal-Cain, who is one of the I think he's the 7th generation down from Cain, and he was the guy that invented metalworking and blacksmithing and things like that. Now, it's interesting. Way back when I did this talk in 1995, I said this. Since Nimrod, Masonry has always been the matrix of all secret societies. Because now we all know this movie, The Matrix, and its sequels is you know, a big thing. Everybody talks about it, but you see, you know what the word matrix means? It actually means womb. That's literally what it means. And the matrix is the womb, the crucible, the place in which the conspiracy is formed. Another word, another kind of synonym for matrix is like a mold. Like if you're doing metal or plastic where you have molten material and you pour it into this mold, that's a matrix. So that's what the word matrix actually means, and that's exactly what Masonry has been down through the centuries. Is like You can take a mold and you can pour, molten gold into it and make a gold whatever, or some of you may even be into hunting and you make your own bullets and you pour the molten lead into a little thingy, and I know nothing about this, but I know there's guys that make their own shells and their own whatever. And it's the same idea. You can take that same mold and pour something else in it. You can pour molten silver in it. And it's the same with masonry. Masonry is the matrix, and you can pour, whether it doesn't matter what it is, different things into it. And that way it's like a virus which comes down through the century and it mutates to meet the needs of the time. Its most effective work is always done in secret, and it always appears outwardly respectable. Now, what I want you to understand here as we talk about this is you want to watch out for the leaven. What do I mean by that? Well, Yeshua warned us in Matthew 16 to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now,
a little leaven.
Leaven in Hebrew is chametz, and basically it is a symbol of wickedness. You'll notice Paul also says this in 1 Corinthians 5:6-8. He said, your glorying is not good. Know ye not that a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump? Purge out therefore the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, for as you are unleavened. Notice the whole symbolism there of the Passover. Even as Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast not with the old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Okay, now, you gotta understand the idea here, and some of you may have studied the Passover in terms of its symbolism, because it's very, very rich. And part of the idea is that you're not supposed to eat leaven for a period of 8 days following the actual feast of Pesach, the feast of Passover. And some of you may know that Orthodox devout Jews will actually go through their house and make sure there's not a lick of leaven in it. They'll look in every nook and cranny, every cupboard. They'll clean everything out scrupulously, and this is a metaphor, This is like a symbol of them getting their lives cleaned up. Because again, leaven is wickedness. And this is what Paul is talking about here in 1 Corinthians. He's referring to this very thing. And it's important to understand that this comets, this leaven, is something that is not readily seen. If any of you have made bread, you know, you sprinkle this yeast in it, it's like this little fine powder, and then what do? You work the dough. You knead the dough, and I've watched my wife do this. I've even done it with her, you know. And after a few minutes, you can't even tell where the leaven is anymore. It just sort of goes into it. It's a perfect metaphor, which is why Yeshua used it. So, you know, he's talking about how this can slip into things and more or less take it over, because then what happens? The whole bread obviously rises. And that's why, you know, if you ever seen a matzah cracker that they